Oh, hi, my name is Bey Logan. Welcome to the Hong Kong Legends DVD release of Chinese Ghost Story 2, known in Cantonese as Xin Loi Yao Wan. Xin is the name of the main character in the movie, played by Joey Wong, and Loi is like Loyan, woman, and Yao Wan is like a wandering spirit. Yao is like unsettled, and Wan is spirit. So the whole meaning of the phrase is the unsettled spirit of the woman Xin, or Xian. And, of course, this movie is a sequel to the smash hit Chinese Ghost Story, which completely redefined Chinese fantasy filmmaking, directed by Ching Siu-tung, produced by the great Tsui Hark. And here we have the logos of the Media Asia Distribution Company and the logo for the distributor of the film, the original distributor, Golden Princess, who, of course, distributed all the movies under their all the movies under that umbrella of Golden Princess, including Film Workshop, which we'll see the logo of in a moment. Film Workshop is actually the production company of Tsui Hark himself. And what happened is he actually had to come up with a name for a film company on the spot. And he thought about it, the fact that he was giving this lecture series at one of the Hong Kong universities, and that was just called Film Workshop. So he said, I'll call it Film Workshop. That's how they got the name for his particular company, which remains active to this day. Opening with images from the first film, these classic images of Joey Wong as the Taiwanese actress Joey Wong as the title character, in the Cantonese version anyway, the title character of Xin Loi, Chinese Ghost Story 2. And we have a different impression now, I think, watching this film, because we see Leslie Cheung, who sadly passed away a year ago, committing suicide, and one of the most wonderful, beloved, and an actor with extraordinary longevity and extraordinary versatility, both as a singer and as an actor, now sadly no longer with us. So I think there's an extra resonance to the character he's playing in this movie, particularly a film that deals so closely with matters of life and death. His character is called Ning. And there we see a quick glimpse of the Taoist master, played by one of the great character actors of Hong Kong cinema, Wu Ma, and we see him again later in the movie. This is a brief recap, and it's unusual. Normally, when you have Hong Kong movies, when they do a sequel, they are very fast and loose with the events of the previous film. I mean, there's an idea that you're going to recapture the energy and the entertainment value of the first movie, but there's hardly ever a sense that you need to do a literal continuation. Chinese Ghost Story 2 is unusual in that it actually is a literal follow-on from the first movie, exploring both the narrative and also the themes that were explored in the first film. So Chinese Ghost Story 2 released in 1990. The budget was very modest by American standards, about $7 million US, which is around 54 million Hong Kong dollars. And it was a huge hit, which explains, of course, why they went on to have a Chinese Ghost Story Part 3. Talking about Leslie Cheung, who's the star of the movie, he was born 12th September 1956 and died tragically at the age of 46 on Tuesday, April the 1st, 2003. I always find it remarkable when I'm looking at Leslie Cheung as this ultimate Chinese icon, as this kind of rather camp pop icon in Hong Kong. He actually started his career studying textiles at Leeds University. And I really, you look at something like that as being a remarkable journey in life, from studying in Leeds, of all places, to starring in movies like Chinese Ghost Story. His birth name is Cheung Fat Zhong, and he's the youngest of 10 children. Apparently, the household he grew up in was quite an unhappy one because of his father's infidelity. The father was a tailor and actually had tailored to the late William Holden, who had starred in several films shot in Hong Kong, most famously Love is a Many Splendid Thing and The World of Susie Wong. Jacky Cheung here, who's a character in the movie, singing one of the several songs performed. Tsui Hark himself is a great lover of musicals, and though Chinese Ghost Story, you don't have people necessarily bursting into song, you do have wonderful use of Chinese Cantonese ballads to enhance the mood and to move the story forwards. And in the first film, you did have the wonderful rap version of the Tao Te Ching, which was performed by Wu Ma. This is kind of a ballad version of the same information. So in the first film, Wu Ma was like the Taoist master, and he can't sing, so he was like rapping. In this movie, Jacky Cheung, Cheung Hot Yao, who is a singer, is playing a young Taoist master, and he can sing. So he's kind of singing about the Tao, about the way, about the philosophy that the Taoists study. And here's in very similar garb to how he appeared at the beginning of the first film, Leslie Cheung, all of the exterior location shots we see here on a specially constructed village in the New Territories of Hong Kong. And a very Western feel. I always feel that the exteriors of these villages are like something out of a spaghetti Western, another one of the great influences of Tsui Hark. But Leslie came back to Hong Kong having studied in England entered a music contest, took second prize, and then moved on to become both a very popular singer of romantic ballads and also a fine and very versatile actor. I mean, I say versatile, it's extraordinary that somebody who is very openly a gay person can play so many roles as a straight romantic lead. This sequence here, very reminiscent of another Tsui Hark produced film, Dragon Gate Inn, in which you have an inn that's operated by people who actually kill and dismember anybody who visits to serve them up as human meat. So this is like a persistent theme through the period martial arts action films produced by Tsui Hark. And you really can't underestimate the influence that Tsui has had on this particular movie, even though the directorial credit is Ching Siu-tung. Even Ching Siu-tung was reluctant to take on the responsibility of directing the first Chinese ghost story, but did so because Tsui had faith in him and pushed him to do it. The moment we saw this dog carrying the human hand, this is from a Chanbara kind of spaghetti western touch. If you see the beginning of Goyokin, the Japanese Chanbara film Goyokin, there's a scene with the dog carrying a human hand to show like unease, and that's also in the remake, the American Western remake Master Gunfighter. Guy on the right of those, if you freeze frame fanatics, the guy on the far left of the bounty hunters is Teen Guy, the goalie from Shaolin Soccer, and the guy on the far right, I think, is Ken Lo Wai Gong, the bodyguard of Jacky Cheung and also a prolific actor in his own right in martial arts action films. Now we have a sequence that's kind of like Count of Monte Cristo meets 1001 Nights, as Leslie Cheung's character finds himself imprisoned with this wrongly accused author who's writing on the walls. And the guy in prison here with Leslie Cheung is played by Gok Fung, or Ku Fang, who's a veteran Shaw Brothers actor. And when I say veteran, he seems to be in almost every Shaw Brothers movie shot throughout the 70s and the 80s, and has wonderful presence and extraordinary style as an actor. And he's used to great use here by Tsui Hark. You can see him in such masterpieces of Shaw Brothers filmmaking as Come Drink With Me, Vengeance, Boxer from Shandong. He actually played the martial arts master Wong Fei-hung in Master of Kung Fu. You can see him in the Shaw Brothers version of King Kong, Mighty Peking Man. He actually plays the father of Wong Fei-hung, Wong Kei-ying, in Martial Club. And later, after the demise of Shaw Brothers, he moved into the independent marketplace. He worked with Brandon Lee, son of Bruce, in Legacy of Rage, and would also work with Tsui Hark on the groundbreaking Peking Opera Blues. He's like the Duracell bunny of Hong Kong filmmaking, Kuk Fung. He just keeps running. He's in Michelle Yeoh's grandfather in Magnificent Warriors, and most recently was starring opposite Daniel Wu in Night Corridor, which was produced last year. And this is like, as I mentioned before, kind of the Count of Monte Cristo influenced scene, because in the Count of Monte Cristo, the young innocent is actually locked up with a much more experienced older man who has, in fact, a method of escaping from prison, but chooses to stay there because of his own personal beliefs. Also, there's a little shot there of the older man eating a cockroach or a gajat, and that's something that echoes Dreadnought, one of Yuen Woo-ping's movies in which the bad guy had. This is a special effects shot, the exterior of the prison. And this is actually one of the first films to use a lot of digital effects or kind of post-produced effects. If you look at the first Chinese ghost story, and in fact, Zhu, Warriors from the Magic Mountain, Suksan, one of the earlier Tsui Hark special effects epics, there's very little in terms of post-produced special effects. Most of the effects were actually generated live on the set using a combination of physical effects, wires, and other kinds of camera trickery. But Tsui has always been ahead of himself, so he actually employed a couple of British experts, special effects experts who'd worked on some American movies to come in and lend their advice to the industry, because he obviously was aware of the fact that in terms of like physical action, Hong Kong cinema has always been ahead of the game, but in terms of special effects, it kind of lagged behind. So he kind of went to people who'd done big blockbuster movies like the Star Wars films to come in and lend their advice. And this film is the first movie to really feature that. So you have a sometimes uneasy blend of cutting-edge digital effects for the 1990 digital effects standards, and also some of the classic physical effects that you used to see in the old Shaw Brothers movies and also the other fantastique movies produced in Hong Kong. So talking about Leslie Cheung, he had an extraordinary career in that he could appear in films of almost any genre, like comedy, light comedies, romances, serious dramas. He was not himself a martial arts exponent, but he could carry off the martial art. He was a very graceful person, so he could carry off martial artistry. And he looked particularly good in period swordplay dramas. he didn't really make any movies in the modern martial arts action vein, but you can see him in swordplay movies like Little Dragon Maiden, which was made at Shaw Brothers in 1982. He also played the kung fu fighter Fong Sayuk on a TV series. He's also in The Eagle Shooting Heroes and Ashes of Time, both of which are films based on the works of Louis Cha, or Yin Zhong, who's a very famous fantasy swordplay novel writer in Hong Kong. And these films were shot round about the same time. Ashes of Time is the best known of the two, being as it was directed by Wong Kar-wai. He's also in the masterful Bride with White Hair Part 1 and the rather less masterful Part 2. And he really kind of carved out a place for himself as a challenged swordsman, as a swordsman who's kind of a troubled, dark, wandering swordplay expert. In this film, the whole point of the character in both Chinese Ghost Story 1 and 2 is he's almost the only character who doesn't know martial arts, who's absolutely useless in a fight sequence, but he's kind of the conscience of the film, and he's the character who's observing and commentating on the motives and the actions of all the people around him. So there's a very human quality to him. There was always a human quality to him as a performer, but particularly in this role, because of the fact that everybody's superhuman, the audience kind of relates to him more, because most of the audience, myself accepted, don't have any superpowers, so they relate more to the human being. And here's the big reveal of the hole that takes the Leslie Cheung out from prison. And of course, it's a wonderful device, because when he actually gets in there and he comes out, he's miles away. I mean, he must have tunneled. How the old man could possibly have dug a tunnel of that particular length. But it works within the context of this film, because we're obviously in a slightly enhanced reality of ancient China. The film itself, director credit is Ching Siu-tung, who of course has been a master action movie director. He's really constantly been redefining on-screen fantasy martial arts action, from Duel to Death to Swordsman to Dragon Gate Inn. And even when he's not been the director of credit, his presence on a film as the action director gives it such a unique feel and flavour that you can almost, just from looking at a couple of frames of a Ching Siu-tung action sequence, you can tell he was the action director of the film. And these are the films for which he's best known as principal director, Chinese Ghost Story 1 and 2, and of course Chinese Ghost Story 3 as well. Here we are back in the new territories of Hong Kong, and poor Leslie has tunnelled all this way away, and it's like it's always fascinating me when we get out into what's supposedly old China. It's actually the new territories of Hong Kong, because people often think of Hong Kong as just this pure metropolis. And as I often mention, if you actually do come to Hong Kong, you really want to get out into the countryside, because this is Hong Kong. This is not shot up in mainland China. This is up in the new territories. Now we have the introduction of a wonderful character played by Jacky Cheung, who's a very popular singer. Jacky Cheung is actually one of the 4 golden kings of cantopop, and they're called the 4 kings, and I always say this because they know 4 king good, but in his case that's not true, because he's a really good singer and also a fun actor. This is like the Bugs Bunny ninja technique, as his method of transport is he's kind of tunneling underground. Now, in this movie, Jacky Cheung kind of plays a younger version of the Taoist master played by Ma in the first movie. And there are different kinds of Taoist masters. I mean, Taoists are followers of the way. They dress in a particular manner. They're often quite eccentric. And they have specific skills in terms of ghost busting, fortune telling, doing feng shui or feng shui, organizing your house so that you'll have good fortune. And there are different kinds of Taoists. There's the fire-dwelling Taoist who lives in town and performs all these different rites, as I was just describing, including funeral services and fortune-telling. Then there's the forest-dwelling one who's fighting ghosts and kind of looking for higher enlightenment. So the 2 Taoist masters that we see in this film, played by Jacky Cheung and Ma, or Wu Ma, are forest-dwelling Taoist masters. And so the forest-dwelling ones have kind of developed their skills to a higher power, which is why they're flying around and thunderbolts are coming out of their hands, and they have these particular powers, like supernatural powers, as a result of their following of the way and doing meditation and other spiritual practices. The Jacky Cheung himself was born on July 10th, 1961, and when he won a singing contest, fast became one of the most popular singers in the Hong Kong music industry, but also went on to have an interesting career in cinema. He really kind of came into his own as an actor in John Woo's film Bullet in the Head, but also simultaneously was having a career in swordplay cinema. He was in the first movie Swordsman, and also in opposite Leslie in Ashes of Time, this big period martial arts epic directed by Wong Kar-wai. He's not Jacky Cheung himself also is not a martial artist per se, but because he has a dance background, he's very flexible. He can pull off martial arts action sequences quite well, and we'll see a bit later he gets to do his thing. You'll notice in the close-ups of Jacky Cheung, there's a very evident scar under his right eye. And when I interviewed him, I asked him, how he got it, and he told us a story about how I think it was his cousin had been watching the movie The One-Armed Swordsman with Jimmy Wong Yu, and was in the living room of their home, and he picked up like a butcher's knife, and he was dancing around pretending to be the One-Armed Swordsman, and somehow got too close to Jacky and kind of sliced across his face, so he had this scar under his eye. But he's probably the only swordplay hero, the only hero in swordplay movies who actually has a blade wound visible on his face, a real blade wound. So that's like his badge of honor. Now, this scene here, where we see Leslie Cheung getting into the bath, there's the rap. There's a rap version of the Tao Te Ching that's performed in the original film by Ma, and keeps being repeated here also by Jacky Cheung and also by Leslie Cheung. So these are songs with the same lyrics taken from the Tao Te Ching and put to music by James Wong Jims, and Romeo Diaz, both of whom are veteran music composers, song composers for Hong Kong cinema. And they're like very... the music for these films is intrinsic. These are probably as close as we've got in the last 10, 20 years to having musical movies in Hong Kong. Back in the Shaw Brothers era, they were really popular and then faded away. But the use of music in these films is very interesting. This is the chanting there is very similar to the chants that were used by Wu Ma in the original film. And this is like a cover version of Wu Ma's rap performed by Leslie Cheung. And the other swordplay movies that Leslie Cheung has been in include Flying Daggers and Eagle Shooting Heroes. And he actually, these films, the swordplay movies, are often known as the Jianghu or Gongwu films. That's kind of like a colloquial way of describing them. And interestingly, Jacky Cheung made a kind of comeback to acting this year in a movie that was called Gongwu. But it actually wasn't a swordplay film, it's a gangster movie with Andy Lau. Now, all the Chinese ghost story series are inspired by the novels of a writer called Pu Songling, who lived in China between 1640 and 715. And the original story, which inspired Chinese ghost story, was called The Magic Sword. And this was first filmed in 1960 as The Enchanted Shadow. And Pu Songling was an interesting character because he was a writer who never really achieved fame early in his lifetime, and really subsequently his books were discovered, and he's hugely prolific. And his books are called, the collection of his works was called Strange Stories from a Chinese Studio. He lived in a city called Zibo, which incorporates within it the ancient town of Sichuan. So that was where Pu Songling was living. And the site of the original home of Pu Songling is still preserved there in the part of the Pu family village. And he's like, he lived at the beginning of the Qing dynasty, and there's actually an original portrait of him hanging in his home, and it's still surrounded by supposedly by the furniture of his times. And was the house of Pu Songling was occupied by his direct descendants as recently as 1948. And it's fortunate because Pu Songling is such an influential writer and had such a great effect on the development of Chinese cinema that his home escaped the Red Guards, the demolition by the Red Guards during the Cultural Revolution, and still stands to this day. Here's like an interesting twist, because in the first Chinese ghost story, the character that is played by Joey Wong is actually a ghost pretending to be human. And when we first see her in this sequence, she's a human pretending to be a ghost. So this is like typical of the Tsui Hark creativity. And for the first time, we see the application of Taoist magic as a ghost-busting technique by Jacky Cheung. And in this instance, he realizes that he's using these techniques to fight ghosts, but really, these are human beings. These are actually rebels against the incumbent emperor. And the character that's played by Joey Wong is a completely different character from the character we saw in the first movie. But this kind of, as Jacky Cheung mentioned when we interviewed him, this is the great kind of martial arts action to do, because you really just have to kind of wave your arms in the air and do this kind of sanda or spirit boxing, and then let the special effects guys do all the rest. Unusual in these movies to have much in the way of unarmed combat, but what there is actually well executed because they have Ching Siu-tung's stunt team working. And the use of wires here is very exceptional, because now we spend millions of dollars doing wire removals on films and actually physically painting them out after the fact. At the time Chinese Ghost Story 2 was made, when you did a wire shot, that was it. You were stuck. The wires were filmed, and you had to actually light the scene in such a way that you couldn't actually see the wires. So here's Jacky Cheung's double going to action for this brief moment of action, brief moment of combat, and they cut to him for the tight close shot. But as I say, quite a challenge for the DP to actually shoot this. The DP in this case, Arthur Wong, a great master of this genre, but has to shoot the sequence in such a way that the wires are never visible. And that's quite a challenge, particularly with someone like Ching Siu-tung, who doesn't just put wires going from like top to bottom, he has wires going left to right in different directions. Great intro scene there for Michelle Reyes, Le Gayan, who had been a beauty queen, and this is actually her movie debut. She's half Chinese and half Portuguese and hails from Macau, and this was her first movie, and of course making a wonderful debut. Anybody who works with the team of Tsui Hark and Ching Siu-tung and DP Arthur Wong is doing well, so she gets like a great introductory moment in the movie. And also some slapstick comedy. You notice the ghost with the tongue hanging out. That's actually a very common image from Chinese ghost films. So these fake ghosts have the tongues hanging out. So the moment of recognition here as we see the flashback to the character from the first movie. But it's worth pointing out that even though this is like a literal follow-on, it's a totally different character played by Joey Wong in this movie. She's not the reincarnation or the returning ghost from the first film. Joey Wong, born 31st of January 1967. She's 5'8", so makes her quite tall for a native of Taiwan, which is where she's from. And she was nominated for Best Supporting Actress for her role in Chinese Ghost Story 1, and actually won Best Supporting Actress at the Hong Kong Film Awards for Chinese Ghost Story 3, which I did not think was the best of the films. I think what it was maybe a Lord of the Rings scenario where she was in 3 of them, and by the time she got to the 3rd film, the Hong Kong Film Awards Academy decided that she needed to have recognition for her work on all 3 movies. So that's why they gave her the award for Chinese Ghost Story 3. She's never really had huge range as an actress, and in fact, after the success of Chinese Ghost Story, she was cast as often as not in these kind of ethereal female spirit roles. And you can kind of see her in a change of pace in opposite Jacky Cheung in City Hunter, which is much more fun, fast-paced, modern kind of movie. But normally she's like the wandering spirit. And there was actually a film shot at Golden Harvest called Portrait of a Nymph, which is an unfortunate title because it sounds like it should be a porno, but it's actually an epic fantasy film and an almost beat-for-beat remake of Chinese Ghost Story. A Chinese Ghost Story made the name of Tony Ching Siu-tung, who's had a very long and interesting career in the industry. He started off, he was a student of Madame Van Fotfar, who was one of the great Peking opera instructors in Hong Kong. The other great one was Yu Jim-yun, who was the instructor of Jacky Cheung and Sammo Hung and all that generation, the Chatsu folk. And then there was Van Fotfar, who is depicted in the movie Painted Faces, and Ching Siu-tung was one of her students. Began working as an actor at Shaw Brothers in small roles. You can see him in Come Drink With Me. He also worked in the wonderfully named Stoner, which was a movie shot at Golden Harvest with George Lazenby as a DEA agent. I mean, only Harvest could make a movie about a drugs enforcement official called Stoner. But he's in that. And there was an attempt to launch him as a Jackie Chan-style comedy kung fu star in the Shaw Brothers movie Monkey Kung Fu. He really found his success behind the camera, though, not in front of it, as a director with movies like The Sword and Duel to the Death, which really redefined the swordplay genre. Those movies he made at Golden Harvest before moving over to Golden Princess and Film Workshop. First worked with Tsui Hark on Peking Opera Blues, and then became the action director on John Woo's The Killer, and then made Swordsman 1 through 3. Those films really came at the beginning of the 90s and this crest of a new wave of martial arts action cinema, and then made Dragon Gate Inn, which also redefined the way you could do a kind of stylized, like a martial art house movie. In recent years, he's been as prolific and as wide-reaching in his skills as ever. I mean, he did Shaolin Soccer for Stephen Chow Sing-chi, Naked Weapon for my old mate Maggie Q. He replaced Stephen Dongwai on Hero, Zhang Yimou's epic martial arts piece, and he's recently worked on the movie Belly of the Beast with Steven Seagal. And I have to say, to go from Leslie Cheung to Steven Seagal is quite a leap for anybody's career. And his most recent works include working as action director, again for Zhang Yimou, on House of Flying Daggers, which was very well received at Cannes Film Festival. And I working with him next year on a movie called Sword Searchers with Nicholas Dare, Jia Fong, and Jacky. So very active Ching Siu-tung. He's an interesting character. I mean, he's famously ill-tempered on the set and famously ill-tempered about being ill-tempered. So you have to be very careful when we talk about him sometimes, because there were some interviews on one DVD when the actors were saying, oh, he's so bad-tempered. And he was very upset, and he was like bad-tempered about being bad-tempered. But anyone who's got a right to be bad-tempered, then it's him, because he has a huge weight and pressure on him to kind of best his previous works, and constantly rises to the occasion. This movie actually was nominated at the Hong Kong Film Awards for Best Action Design, and the whole team were nominated. Ching Siu-tung, as well as Lau Chi-ho, Wu Chi-long, Yun Bun, a fellow classmate of Jacky Cheung and Sammo Hung at the old Peking Opera Academy of Yu Jim Yun, Ma Yuk-sing, who's a key member of Ching Siu-tung's team, and Cheng Yu-sing. So this is the whole team who are working with Ching Siu-tung to design the action sequences for the film. Bear in mind, on a Hong Kong movie, the stunt action team don't just go into action when the characters are fighting, but also every time they're flying through the trees or when you see objects flying around. This is actually the work of the Hong Kong stunt team. So there's like a really wide-ranging list of things they're called upon to do for an epic fantasy like this one. So you need a bunch of people on the team. Here we get this kind of a classic kind of element of this kind of movie, which is the love triangle that's unrequited because of conventional social mores. You have a girl who's been betrothed to another man since, her childhood, and then there's her sister in arms, and they both fall in love with the same man, and he's in love with a ghost. And this is all the kind of material that you see in these kind of films. And Tsui likes to play with it and kind of play with the audience's expectations. Because Chinese ghost story really comes from a long tradition of both of these kind of supernatural fantasy, and also films based on the works of Pu Songling's Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio. The other films based on Pu's books include Fairy Ghost Vixen from 1965, The Haunted from 1967, and The Spirits from 1969, and The Devil's Skin, 1970. And Chinese ghost story really kind of turned all of these kind of conventions inside out and redefined a new style of Hong Kong fantasy action. And there's been many, it's been oft copied but seldom equaled. This is a wonderful, this is a great combination of elements. You've got like the luminous cinematography of Arthur Wong together with this kind of, the wind blowing and the beauty of Joey Wong as she's like leading the charge, plus the fact that this is a classic Arthur Wong shot. I mean, he's always working in the woods at night, but lighting it in such an unconventional way that you don't feel there's like unnatural beams of light illuminating the actors. It all feels very natural. This is great. This is what I call the Jurassic Park shot, as we see this first view of the first monster that we're going to see in the film. Now, I'm making no apologies for the monsters that we see in the film. They utterly unrealistic, but they're part of the fun of the fair. I think it's like a Japanese Godzilla movie. I don't think anybody really believes in Godzilla as a real creature, but their films are still kind of hokey fun, and I think this is the case here. So you have this combination of physical martial arts action, the kind of CGI special effects work that's been done to enhance the finished product, and some of these mechanical effects, which really are rather dated now, but are still kind of fun. This is kind of cute, this idea of the freezing, and it's kind of a Monty Python-esque kind of routine where you can actually aim your palm at somebody and freeze them, and then, of course, Jacky Cheung accidentally gets frozen. And this is something that all these conventions of kung fu swordplay characters being able to extend their palm all goes back to the days of Buddha Palm, which was a black and white series of movies starring Cho Dat-wah, and he had the power to fire like arrows and weapons and animals out of his palm, and so this is kind of playing with that. I always think with these movies that the shadow of the monster and the kind of the bodies left crushed by the monster are far more awe-inspiring than the actual creature itself when it appears. And this is unfortunately one of the budget limitations of this movie and of all the movies made during this era. As soon as they had to create a monster, it always came down to being kind of a guy in a suit or something not too realistic. This looks like something left over from Zoo Warriors or maybe Godzilla's Hong Kong Vacation. But you do get the old guy in the suit thing, and the only thing that makes it different from what you might see in Japan is the fact that when they do breakaways, because they have the wires and because they understand how to use the power powder, the actual movement of the monster is more effective. But this is obviously the guy in the suit with dry ice coming out of his mouth, and it's a kind of a fun element to have in the picture, but you can't take it too seriously. Hong Kong audiences don't tend to go to movies to be enlightened. They come purely to be entertained. And this is why a lot of the times people are critical of Hong Kong films, and they see great gaps in the logic or the fact that there are cheesy elements to the production values of the stories. But the audience in Hong Kong is really, as long as you've shown them a good time, they don't tend to be sitting there nitpicking about whether there's continuity or whether things make sense. They just wanted to have a good time. A couple of shots of the monster remind me in outline of The Wicker Man from that classic horror movie. But you always see with Tsui this kind of mad inventiveness and creativity. And I think this movie, more than any of the others, or films in this style, more than any other, show us the inner workings of the extraordinary mind of Tsui Hark, because he really does throw these elements together in a fresh and imaginative way. And because Tsui himself thinks in such an unconventional manner, sometimes when you see him doing contemporary movies, you don't get the full effect of his imagination. But once you do a movie like Chinese Ghost Story 2, all bets are off, because there's all kinds of magic you can draw on, all kinds of folklore that you can draw on, and you can really see the full extent. Whatever he can imagine, he can actually depict on screen. Chinese Ghost Story, as well as the film series, has also inspired a TV show which starred the actor and singer Daniel Chan. And that played on television. It was actually shot in Taiwan, but played all around the region. And that's like a common trend. If you have a movie series, once the movie series runs out of steam, you do a TV show. And also happened with the Once Upon a Time in China films, because you had Once Upon a Time in China 1 through 4, and then a TV series inspired by the Wong Fei-hung character. So here I said, this is a little different from what you might see in a Japanese movie, because the breakaways seem to have more weight to them, and they use the power powder, the power fun, which they cover all the props with, so that when anything breaks through them, there's all this dust flying in the air, and it adds to the impact. Plus the fact that you can actually put wires on props and other bits of business, so that you actually have stuff flying away, and it has like a literal weight to it. I mean, sometimes if you see a Japanese Godzilla movie, the props are obviously made of balsa wood or of polystyrene, so they don't have any weight. Here, they often have the real object wired, and then the stuntmen will pull it on wires. So the object flying through the air has its own intrinsic weight, which I think gives it a certain reality that perhaps otherwise wouldn't be there. But I love this stuff. I mean, it's very bright humor between these two players. And Jacky Cheung is really great in this character. I mean, he's become an actor of extraordinary depth. But at the time he was doing this movie, he wasn't that experienced. And this is kind of close to his real happy-go-lucky nature. And so it's like an impressive role. He always reminded me in his early days of a young, very reminiscent of Jackie Chan. He looked like the younger brother of Jackie Chan. And all the more confusing when you notice they had the same name, though Jacky Chan is Jackie and Jacky Cheung is Jacky. So that was how you kind of tell one Jackie from the other. And to kind of bring all of these ideas together in the movie, Tsui Hark brought together a team of writers. There's Edward Leung, who also wrote Stephen Chow Sing-chi's movie Magnificent Scoundrels in 1991. Lam Kei-do, who acted actually in the movie Once Upon a Time in a Triad Society, and also is a writer, like everybody in Hong Kong, a multi-talent writer and actor. And Lau Daimok, who's probably the most prolific of Choi's writers for hire. He also wrote the original Chinese Ghost Story, An Iron Monkey, and The Master, which was the first movie that Tsui Hark made with Jet Li. So this team are actually brought round the table with Tsui and with Ching Siu-tung, and between them come up with the storyline and all the crazy ideas that you're going to see in Chinese Ghost Story 2. So there's not a sense that one writer goes away and comes up with the whole thing. They kind of sit there and kind of hash out what they can do that hasn't been done in the first movie, and how they can structure the film to incorporate all of the visual effects and other action beats that they want to have. The director of photography is the magnificent Arthur Wong, who fans of the genre will know from his work on movies like Once Upon a Time in China, Iron Monkey. He's currently filming Ultraviolet, which stars Mila Jovovich, and they shot that in Hong Kong, and they're still shooting in Shanghai. And he had also worked with Jean-Claude Van Damme on the movie Knockoff. So Arthur's an extraordinary DP, and probably the best guy that ever has been in Hong Kong cinema in terms of shooting action, specifically in terms of shooting period martial arts action. And I mentioned earlier the music for the film. You can't really underestimate the power of the use of music in these films. The music's actually courtesy of James Wong and also Romeo Diaz. James Wong worked with Choi on Peking Opera Blues, Swordsman. He rewrote the kind of Wong Fei-hung music for Once Upon a Time in China, Dong Ji-kung. You see him as an actor in Iron Monkey, and now, apart from doing music for movies, James Wong also does oldie shows with Joseph Koo, who was the composer of the music for The Big Boss and Fist of Fury, two of the big hits of Bruce Lee. And James Wong actually was nominated for Best Song Award for two songs in A Chinese Ghost Story Part 1. And they were Do, which was performed by Wu Ma, Tao or Do, performed by Wu Ma, and the title song, Xin Lo Yao Wan, which was performed by Leslie Cheung himself. And he won Best Score, and actually won Best Score and Best Song for the third song from the film, which is Lai Ming Bat Yuloi, Daybreak Doesn't Arrive, which is performed by Sally Yip Siman. And all those songs and more are reprised in Chinese Ghost Story 2. So this shows you when I say these are kind of like the nearest thing we've had in Hong Kong to a musical. There are all these songs. There were actually 3 songs nominated for Best Song at the Hong Kong Film Awards for the first film. And one won and 2 did not. But it's extraordinary to have 3 films nominated. 3 songs nominated from the same film. He also, in his career, won Best Score for the movie Terracotta Warrior, and also had Best Song for Sam Hoi's song Chong Hoi Yat Sing Siu, The Blue Sea Lets Out a Laugh, from the movie Swordsman. And he's paired here with Romeo Diaz, who, like James, is a veteran music composer. So here with pyrotechnics going off in the wilds of the New Territories, and it's like this is kind of like another element of the film. You've got a lot of stuff happening in terms of wires and special effects and those kind of martial artistry, and also pyrotechnics. And the pyrotechnics actually tend to be the most dangerous, because whenever you're dealing with fire stunts, it's an unpredictable element. So this is probably the most scary element in terms of the experience of the actors on set. Now introducing another one of our characters, this very Japanese-style party of riders led by Wei Li, who's known really for contemporary roles. Most people who are fans of the genre will know him from his work on A Better Tomorrow and Bullet in the Head. I think he's very impressive here in an atypical role as this kind of samurai-style swordsman armed with his kwando and with the blades on his back. He's kind of a forerunner of a character that Choi would create for the sequel to Zoo Warriors, Legend of Zoo, Suksan Dai, because that guy played by Koo Tin-lok, had all these swords, kind of CGI swords coming out from his back. Here they haven't got to that point yet, so they're these real swords. I just want to mention, I think that probably the worst special effect in the movie is Wei Li's mustache. If you take a look at it in the close shots, it's kind of stuck on a bit haphazardly. But he comes across very well. I mean, I was not a big fan of his performance in John Woo's Bullet in the Head, but here, even though he's not known for doing swordplay, he really carries it off very well and does quite a bit of the martial arts action himself. But more to the point, he has kind of like a dignity and presence. You can also see him in the movie Wing Chun, but then in Wing Chun, he's like the scholar who has to be defended by Yin Wing Chun, played by Michelle Yeoh. So it's very unusual to see Wei Li in an action role, and this is kind of like a little bit of an unusual moment. You can also see him in Zen of the Sword, directed by Ching Siu-tung, but he's still best known for contemporary work. Now working more on television. He's like a TV actor. He was on a famous show about firefighters. This is one of the younger brothers of Yuen Woo-ping, who's the family, nine brothers in the family, all of whom work in the industry. So this kid's hardly ever seen, but he has a little run-on role here as the second-in-command of Wei Li. Now we see the captured father of the Joey Wong and Michelle Reyes characters. The father's played by Lau Siu-ming, who was the star of the very first Tsui Hark film, Butterfly Murders, which is produced at Seasonal by Si-yen. And you saw him in the first Chinese Ghost Story playing the tree spirit. And I worked with him on the movie The Medallion. And I think I told this story on the first film, but it's such a fun story, I want to tell it again. When we were working with Lau Siu-ming, he's in great shape. He's very proud of being in really good shape, even though he's like, I think he's in his 60s, or he's almost 60. And he was on the set doing a scene with Julian Sands. And we had an American DP who was directing some of the reshoots. And he came in and Lau Siu-ming says to the DP, I'm in really good shape. You wouldn't believe in what good shape I'm in. I still work out. I'm in great shape for a for a man of my years. And the guy says, yeah, I believe you. And then Lau Siu-ming says, go on, feel my butt, feel it. And I don't know, normally if you know, abs or biceps, but, feel my ass. So that's great. That's very Lau Siu-ming. He's a great character and a fun guy. This is interesting. The fact that you have the head of the bounty hunters is an idea that's carried through from the first movie. The first Chinese ghost story, they were like bounty hunters going through town, trying by fair means or foul to find suspected criminals. And here, the head bounty hunter has this very distinctive red outfit, so you're always aware that it's about the bounty hunters. The arrival of the marching band is very reminiscent of the arrival of the evil monk in Iron Monkey. Also notice the way that Tsui is always very critical of organized religion. So we actually see in this film, as one of the themes of the movie, is the fact that even though the essence of religion, the essence of Buddhism or Taoism is good, it can easily be corrupted by the evil of those that practice it. So as in Green Snake and many of other Tsui's films, you get really a rather skeptical interpretation of Buddhism. So here you have this chanting of the sutras, but there's a certain ominous feel to it. It doesn't feel very encouraging. It doesn't. When you hear the chanting, it doesn't speak of salvation and grace. It's kind of rather intimidating. And here a reprise of the song from the original film as Leslie Cheung shaves off the beard. So there's also this kind of comedy of errors that earlier he was accused of being a guy who'd shaved off his beard, and now he's grown the beard and has to shave it off, and now he's not recognized by his former colleagues. So it's kind of this tricky bits of business that Tsui Hark is famous for. Again, I mean, even though Ching Siu-tung is the director of credit, I think you could not underestimate the influence that Tsui Hark as producer had on the film. And a lovely close-up there of Michelle Lee. Born 20th of June 1970. As I mentioned earlier, she's born in Macau of mixed Portuguese-Chinese descent. She was Miss Hong Kong in 1989 and made her debut in this movie. Later you could see her in Swordsman 2, opposite Yun Bu in Kid from Tibet. She's also in Ching Siu-tung's Zen of the Sword, and opposite Jet Li in Fong Se-yuk Parts 1 and 2. And also appeared in Drunken Master 3. So she's done a fair run of martial arts epics. Her latest film was Miss Du Xi Niang, in which she played the title character. And recently less active as an actress, but she has been constantly modelling. So she's still a beauty and still very much on the Hong Kong entertainment scene. She mentioned the editing of the film. It's a very well-edited movie. I don't like to admit that because it's edited by Mac Chi-sin, who I worked with on Colour of the Truth, and I was actually working as an actor on that movie, Hatbak Samlam. And he actually is not great. He was directing the picture, and he's not a lot of fun to work for as a director, but he does a very good job as an editor. He recently directed a martial arts movie in mainland China, which was called Zanda, which is produced by Tsui Hark, which didn't do that well. But he was nominated for this movie for Best Editing at Hong Kong Film Awards, and actually is one of the best action editors in the business. There seems to be like a stock policy with these films that you've got to get Joey Wong naked and kind of at a disadvantage as often as possible. So you get her bathing sequence in this movie. Now you look here at the guy on the right here, the better looking of the two young guards is actually To Siu-chun, who was launched as an action star in his own right, starred in a movie called Dreams of Glory, A Boxer's Story, one of the most alliterative titles in Hong Kong cinema history, and it was made by D&B Films. It was a kickboxing film. And you can also see him in His Fatal Ways, Come From China, and in the SWAT team actioner Best of the Best, which also starred Jacky Cheung. It's kind of the Freddy shot here with the hand. Kind of a little bit of the King Kong element there with the Beauty and the Beast. But like I say, they always want to heap indignities upon Joey Wong, and I guess it's because she has a very fragile beauty, so they want to it's kind of, I suppose, there's a sense that it's funnier because she's so fragile and ethereal to kind of dip her in gunk and have her running around naked in this circumstance. So it makes it all the more entertaining that she's such a angelic kind of figure. I also think that there was some leeway in this film because in the first movie, because she was a ghost, there was only a certain number of things that you could do with the character. And here she's a human, so obviously to kind of differentiate the two movies, you actually have her interaction with Leslie Cheung is on quite a different level to the kind of human and ghost interaction on the first movie. Notice the different costuming between the characters who are Taoist and the characters who are Buddhist in the film. The Taoist robes are much more drab in colours, and the Taoists tend to wear a different style of hats. This is like a Taoist scholar's robes as worn by Leslie Cheung. And this is kind of the kind of slapstick humor that works very well with Hong Kong audiences. And there is a tendency when you're doing a Hong Kong movie, a Hong Kong entertainment film, it's really like a kind of a fusion cooking. You're trying to throw in as many elements as possible so that you entertain the audience by fair means or foul. So as well as having martial arts and drama and music and monsters, you also have this kind of comedy of errors of the characters based on the social etiquette of the time. So it's constantly this constant attempt to keep the audience off balance. The thing you had in Hong Kong in the 90s and in the 80s really was that Hong Kong cinema was so prolific, and it was so prolific within the same genres that audiences had kind of seen everything. So you needed people like Tsui Hark and Ching Siu-tung to come in and really stretch the boundaries of imagination. This is a real King Kong shot as the monster's looking through the window there. And another process shot. Just mentioned about our special effects experts on the movie. Most of the physical effects were generated by the Hong Kong team, but we have visual effects by Nick Older and David Watkins, both of whom are veterans of the, I would say the American, I mean basically they're working on American movies shot in England. Both of them are British, but they're working on American movies or American TV series that were shot on location in the UK. Nick Older really is a veteran. He started off on the Gerry Anderson TV series Spaced in 1999, also worked on the Star Wars movie The Empire Strikes Back, Alien, Conan the Barbarian, Legend, which I think is was a good dry run for doing a film like this, Highlander Endgame with my partner in crime Donnie Yen, and Blade 2, also with Donnie. He recently worked on Hellboy, and his latest credit is a fantasy epic called Prime Evil. And then there's David Watkins, who also worked on Alien, also in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, with Jean-Claude Van Damme on The Quest, and with Jacky Cheung on Shanghai Noon. So both these men were brought to Hong Kong to kind of work with the local stunt coordinators and the local special effects team, and also to kind of share some of their knowledge. I mean, this is something that Tsui has constantly done, Tsui Hark has done throughout his career, is try to bring fresh talent into the industry so that he can actually raise the level of Hong Kong filmmaking. And as well as doing digital special effects in the Chinese Ghost Story films, he also did a full-length animated feature of Chinese Ghost Story and brought these kind of top-notch effects artists over to show them how to do it, and also invested in a lot of special effects equipment and a lot of kind of animation equipment so they could do animation to an international level. Though the film itself was not a huge success, you certainly have to give full credit to Tsui Hark for his ingenuity in terms of trying to raise the standards of our industry here. This is something which is kind of a real Looney Tunes moment. They're setting up all these monster traps, and you kind of see it's kind of that Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner feel to it. They're setting up all the traps, but you kind of know when it comes down to the wire, the monster won't get caught in the traps, but one of the other characters will, and probably the character played by Leslie Cheung. So it's kind of, the audience knows this, but it's kind of fun to go along for the ride. So going back to talk about Leslie Cheung, as I mentioned before, he was a keen, like a real leading idol in the Hong Kong music industry, and had appeared in a number of movies and TV series. He didn't really take off as an actor until he played the role of Kit in John Woo's Better Tomorrow, Ying Hong Bunsek, The True Colours of a Hero. And he was so good in that as a young police officer that his career took off, and he's since then worked with all of the best-known directors of Hong Kong and also many well-known mainland Chinese directors as well. His extraordinary, as I mentioned earlier, in that he can play completely convincingly straight, heterosexual mainstream roles when it was known in Hong Kong that he was actually somebody with a gay lifestyle. He had lots of other business interests apart from doing movies. He bought real estate. He had a coffee shop in the Causeway Bay area, and is one of the most greatly loved performers on the scene, and makes it all the more tragic that he committed suicide just a year ago. And the reasons behind that really remain unclear, the actual motivations behind his decision to kill himself by jumping from the Mandarin Hotel to his death. But one thing that was put forward as a theory was the fact that he had actually made a film called Inner Senses, which was a film about somebody who's pursued by like these mental demons. And in Inner Senses, his character actually goes to the edge of the precipice and is tempted to jump. And there were these rumours that he was actually possessed by evil spirits. And that's why I think now when we look at Chinese Ghost Story in the light of these stories and gossip, it kind of has a different resonance than it might otherwise have. So after Inner Senses, Leslie Cheung dropped out of two movies, the movie 203040, which is being directed by Sylvia Cheung, Cheng Aga, and also from Xu Feng's Beautiful Shanghai, a movie produced by Xu Feng called Beautiful Shanghai. So there was a sense that, things were not right with Leslie Cheung. And then, of course, finally we heard the tragic news that he jumped from the 24th floor of the Mandarin Hotel, leaving behind a suicide note that it really said that he was tired of life and wanted to die, but didn't give a specific reason as to why he chose to commit suicide. So very sad that he's no longer with us, but makes we appreciate all the more the work that he left behind, and particularly the Chinese Ghost Story films, which arguably are the films he's best known for worldwide. I want to mention one thing about the film that I think has dated more than even the big scary monsters, is the fact that all the girls in the film have the same eyebrow makeup that seems to be applied but with a magic marker. And this is endemic of Hong Kong movies during this era. They had like one makeup for all, and you'd go in and they'd kind of get this big eyebrow pen or whatever it was and draw on the eyebrows. And that's something that's it's changed now as time has passed, and I'm not sorry to see goodbye to that kind of makeup. This is kind of takes a bit of a stretch of the imagination that for the length of time that she talks, she believes that it's Leslie Cheung standing behind her. This is another Freddy Krueger shot of the claws coming in here, and she doesn't realise it's a big sulphur-breathing monster standing behind her. But it kind of makes for a fun moment. And it's this constant balance between the comedy elements and the horror elements. Now, this moment, I think, you'd realise right away that big slimy face was not the attractive Leslie Cheung. I mentioned again the breakaways, as we see here, this whole sequence here. The props do tend to have a lot more weight to them than those you see in some other monster movies, the ones that are made in Japan. So here's like the setup, and now, of course, they want to get all the Wile E. Coyote traps to catch the monster, and they're going to kind of bounce back upon their creator. This is actually quite a nice shot. Always with these special effects, the less you show, the less clear something is, the better it looks. So the shot of the monster just coming out there amid all the smoke and steam looks quite good. Then when you get it on the tight shot, you see the detail. This is really cool. I mean, just breaking frame, having the characters peer into the camera like this. And imagine when this is projected on a huge movie screen, the effect is much more, impressive and effective even than it is on DVD. So here we have the guy in the suit. Of course, he's one of the stuntmen, so that he can actually put up with things being thrown at him from all directions. And again, Leslie Cheung is the one guy who doesn't have any supernatural power, so he cannot leap upwards. Notice the banyan tree in the background there. That's the uniquely Hong Kong style tree. If you ever come to Hong Kong, you see a lot of banyan trees. These kind of traps, by the way, are the kind of things you normally see being laid out in the jungles by Vietnamese guerrilla fighters. So they've kind of applied that to this big interior set. All the interior stuff here we're seeing shot in a studio at the Coke, what used to be called the Coke Factory, which is a studio space in Hong Kong on Kowloon side. So here we have all these traps kind of that were meant to catch the monster actually being used to threaten poor Leslie Cheung. There's kind of Indiana Jones feel. I love the way the faces are kind of following him like a tennis match as he swings along. And he's meant to be their leader, so he should be actually the most adept, but actually he needs the girls to come and save him. And among the stunt doubles working for the girls here was Lei Fei, who is actually the witchy woman in Iron Monkey, and she turns up later as one of the evil followers of the bad monk. But she was also a stunt double. She's a wushu champion in Hong Kong, and also Lei Fei was a stunt double for Joey Wong and for Lei Gaiyan for these kind of aerial techniques that they have to do. Always interesting to see these movies that sometimes they can fly and sometimes they have to walk along. So it's like just application of their light body qigong, and this is how they you decide in a certain scene whether they can fly or not. It's dependent on how they're using their qi. This is the exterior. They mocked up a wall out in the New Territories. The interior is in the studio, so they mocked up that wall with the light behind it so that you can actually match up the shots when they run out into the exterior for this confrontation. And again, this kind of cool style to Wei-Zi Lee, who's they're really trapped between a rock and a hard place because you have the the wounded monster. A couple of the shots there reminded me of the ending of the Brotherhood of the Wolf, which was another movie that I think very much influenced by this kind of Hong Kong fantasy epic, because you had so many elements in Brotherhood of the Wolf: martial arts, monsters, magic, all these different things thrown together in a way that most American movies do not. Wisely Lee, again, not a martial arts exponent, but they really make him look good with that weapon he's using is kind of a variant of the Kwon Do, and he has all these blades flying out from all directions. I always think if you go into a Hong Kong film, you're never going to look as cool as you do in a Hong Kong period swordplay movie, because the style of action is just so wonderful. Very tricky to do, and full respect to Joey Wong and Michelle Reyes for doing as much action as they do in this film, because it's actually, people look at it from the perspective of watching the film are probably thinking it looks easy. That's always a bit like ballet, it always looks easy. But when you're actually under pressure on the set to remember choreography and to make the action look realistic, it's actually quite challenging. And this kind of, again, very slapstick moments to brighten the tone of the piece. Here's the man versus monster, and again, stuntman in the suit, and these blades coming out from all directions from Wisely Lee, and they constantly interplaying between the kind of the dummy itself, the guy in the suit, and all these bits flying on wires. So there's like one damn thing after another. And it's interesting to see these films are reinterpretations of like the folk stories and the ghost tales that were heard by Tsui Hark and Ching Siu-tung in their youth. And now these films have become the influence for Western filmmakers. So you get people like Sam Raimi, who obviously were very influenced by particularly Chinese Ghost Story Part 1 in terms of making movies like Evil Dead. So you get like a continuation of the myth. So you get the reinterpretation of a reinterpretation. So it's fascinating the way that there's this kind of communication between cultures in terms of folklore, and these films have become now hugely popular internationally, and so they're kind of influencing a new generation. Keep cutting back to these wonderful shots. I guess they sent Arthur Wong out to shoot all these kind of pickup shots of like sunrise and moonrise so that you have something to cut away to. Arthur's remarkable because he can come in and always looks for ways to find the intimate moment in the epic and also the epic moment in the intimate. As a backstory to this, of course, you have the clash between the ruling regime, the ruling emperor, and the fact that these rebels, people who have been forced into opposition by the fact that their father has been declared not to be a patriot, and therefore he's going to be executed, so they have to fight back against the emperor. And always you have a sense, though, that the emperor and his influence is really quite far away. We never get to see huge armies and castles of the emperor. We really get to see quite an intimate clash between individuals that's set in this blasted wood, in this kind of like scene of horror. Here we are, of course, back on the studio set and cutting back and forward between the woods of the New Territories and the studio. I think the studio set was not far from Kwun Tong when the old Coke factory was standing, and it allowed you a lot of leeway to come indoors and set up whatever stunt sequences you wanted to do, whatever explosions you wanted to do. And also, of course, they went out to the New Territories and did the same. Back in the days when this movie was made, it was almost impossible to get government permission, so you kind of had to play it fast and loose. So for all the pyrotechnic scenes, they actually had to go back out into the woods and do the explosions illegally and then run away afterwards and hope nobody came from the police or the fire department. Here's your exorcist shot as the possessed Joey Wong rises up, and it's like kind of a very primitive use of these visual effects. And the budget, of course, did not allow for huge visual effect shots. But even by the standards of Hong Kong, it was unusual to have these kind of visuals happen. And this is kind of like a Raiders of the Lost Ark final scene moment. And there's certain animals and creatures that are like endemic to Hong Kong horror. The fox spirit is one. Snakes is another. You see like killer snakes in other movies in the old Shaw Brothers horror films. And then the use of some really kind of industrial strength acupuncture there to kind of see the real nature of this creature. And that's an animatronic produced at the at Film Workshop. Tsui Hark, I think, under his rule, had almost every area of filmmaking. It was almost like a mini Shaw Brothers. You had every area of filmmaking, the script writing team. You had guys working on animatronics, guys working on post-production special effects, the action team putting stuff together, all under one roof. And Film Workshop constantly on the cutting edge of Hong Kong filmmaking. And I'm interested now, actually, as we speak, Tsui is actually preparing something of a comeback movie in terms of doing a swordplay actioner. He's preparing a movie called Seven Swords or Seven Swordsmen. So here's this woman redeemed by a kiss from this guy. And the character, of course, of Leslie Cheung is not in love with her for herself, but in love with this ghost that she resembles, the character that we saw in the first Chinese ghost story. There's always a running theme throughout the film is like, what is the real nature of the world, or what is anybody really what they seem to be? Throughout this film, nobody is quite who they seem. So you constantly have this kind of dichotomy between somebody's expectations and who they really turn out to be. And in a moment we have the arrival of the Buddhists, and of course there again, because monks generally have a benign image, you expect that anybody who's like an abbot probably has a good motivation for whatever they're doing. But in fact, in this case, it's not so. When I first saw the film, I wondered if the fact they'd used Jacky Cheung was because Wu Ma was not available. And later I realized it's because they needed to have a love interest, and Wu Ma wouldn't really work as love interest for Lei Gaiyan. Now the return of this rather ominous chanting as we have the arrival of our transsexual abbot. I mean, only a Tsui Hark movie, a Ching Siu-tung directed Tsui Hark movie, would have as its villain a transsexual Buddhist abbot who transforms into a giant centipede. That is something you will not see in an American movie anytime soon. So we have the character of the monk, as we're about to see, is played by Lao Shan, who's actually an expert on opera. He's a Chinese opera expert, and who first worked with Choi on Peking Opera Blues, and he's such a distinctive character that Choi decided to put him in the film as a character. It's interesting the use of hei or breath or chi power in these films. You have both the power to critically damage somebody and also healing power. And the Taoist masters, of course, use this to heal people. Beautifully lit shots, incidentally, these close-up shots of the characters. I mean, Arthur is very good at going back from doing these kind of great panoramas to doing these very intimate, beautifully lit shots that reflect the drama of the piece. So, I mean, he's a great director, because some directors of photography really have one area which they excel, but Arthur's versatility is what makes him really extraordinary, and one of the DPs working in Hong Kong, and he's still working to this day. Began his career at Shaw Brothers, working on movies way back, including 36 Chamber of Shaolin. I think he was actually the youngest person ever to become a full DP. He was in his late teens, Arthur Wong, when he first became a DP on a movie, and has continued working consistently ever since. Also, they have great shot composition. If you look, many times you see, to show the depth of the room and the kind of the fact that people are observing the conversation, you actually see people positioned in the background so that you actually have not just these big tight shots of people talking, but a sense of like a interrelation between the different characters. I think Jacky Cheung's great in this because his kind of he's the comic relief. Leslie Cheung is the human aspect. Leslie is the character that the audience relates to, and Jacky is the character that makes the audience laugh because he has this kind of buffoonish quality. So here the love triangle kind of getting resolved, and you needed the Taoist master to be young and handsome enough in the person of Jacky Cheung that Lei Gaiyan could conceivably fall in love with him, and so set up this next act of the romantic nature of the film. Here we have our Buddhist master arriving with his female sidekicks. Very Japanese look to the costumes and styling of this movie, both in the costume of Wei-Zi Li and also in the way that the Buddhists are presented. As I mentioned before, Lao Shan, opera expert. He's probably best known internationally as playing Wong Kei-ying in the father of Wong Fei-hong in Once Upon a Time in China 3, 4, and in the spin-off TV series. And he's not really a martial arts player per se, but because he did opera, he's quite physical, so he can move very well. And he's also a fine dramatic actor, and you can see him in the movie Summer Snow, the award-winning film Summer Snow from An Hui, and also in Demi Haunted. And he's got a great face, and actually, off-camera, is one of the most friendly and talkative fellows you could hope to meet. He doesn't actually speak any Cantonese. He only speaks Mandarin because he actually hails from mainland China. I think he's from Shanghai. And so whenever he does work in Hong Kong movies, as here, he speaks in Mandarin and then is dubbed into Cantonese. Mind you, at the time this movie was made, it was all Hong Kong films were shot without sound, and the sound was actually dubbed in later, so language really wasn't an issue. Now, the foremost of the female followers of the evil abbot is played by Yeung Ching, who we see talking here, and we see her kind of on the right of the frame as they come into the ruined temple. You see on the right there. Young Ching Ching was actually a kung fu actress from the Shaw Brothers era. You can see her in Return to the 36th Chamber of Shaolin, Clan of the White Lotus, 8 Diagram Pole Fighter, License to Steal, God of Gamblers 3, Back to Shanghai. And now she's kind of semi-retired from the industry. And there's the wonderful Lao Shun. And if you look at his lip movement, you can actually see he's speaking Mandarin and is dubbed into Cantonese, also with a woman's voice. This idea of the transsexual villain is a kind of a stock element of these kind of fantasy movies. And the idea is that somebody's used their chi power in such a way they've kind of transcended their own sexuality. So here we have this guy speaking, a man speaking with the voice of a woman. And you can see the same idea in A Chinese Ghost Story 1. The tree spirit, who was played by this actor, was really again, a male presence speaking with a female voice. And here it's Lao Shan. And you saw the transsexual villain idea in another direction, played by Lam Ching-ha as Dongfang Batpai, Invincible Asia in the movie Swordsman 2 and The East is Red. So it's like these are stock elements now in the West. People are familiar with them, but at the time this movie was first played in Hong Kong, the audience already knew that they had these kind of transsexual characters in films. And the evil application of Buddhist chanting as these people are being hypnotized, and the killing off of a couple of our heroic figures. In a moment we see Jacky Cheung, who's like, because he's a Taoist master, realizes there's evil chanting is going on. And then you'll see, this is one of the special effects shots provided by the British effects technicians. And again, quite primitive, but for its time, really quite an accomplished shot. Now, Jacky Cheung realizes something's going on, that he gets these yellow papers. The yellow paper is actually called a fu, and you use it to ward off evil spirits. If you see the movies with the vampires or Guernsey, they always, to kind of stop the vampire moving, you stick a fu onto the forehead. And the fu is like the yellow paper with Chinese writing on it with his incantations. I've never seen it used in quite this way before, but here you see it used both as like ear protection to stop him hearing the evil chanting, and also to kind of power his energy palm. But that's the different uses of the fu. You also still see fu to this day. If you have a house that's meant to be haunted, they'll have like a ceremony outside, and people will stick fu over the doors to kind of give blessings to any unquiet spirits who might be there. Here we have like another visual effect of this big Buddha. Choi, of course, very skeptical about organized religion, and this is kind of the first incarnation for him of a big Buddha. In the movie Knockoff with Jean-Claude Van Damme, he actually has the CIA have a headquarters inside the real big Buddha in Hong Kong, and he actually manages to blow up the big Buddha at the end of the movie. So I think we can, safely say that Tsui Hark really has it in for organized religion and for organized Buddhism in particular, because there's the big Buddha kind of tends to have a tough time with things. Though here it's kind of the Buddha. This Buddha is actually a representation of the chi power of the evil abbot, and so he's like using this to try to eliminate his enemies. But these physical motions date back to the days of the Buddha palm movies, and now they coupled with these kind of visual effects. In the old days, when they wanted to accomplish the same effect, they had to physically scrape onto the film, actually onto the physical film itself, frame by frame. They would draw on like an arrow coming out of somebody's palm or swords flying through the air, and that's how you got the effect. And it was kind of like doing stop motion, when you move like a figure, beat by beat, and then play the film back at normal speed and the figure seems to come alive. That was how they did it back in the old days. Now, by the time of Chinese Ghost Story 2, you had Choi bringing in visual effects and kind of getting the same result, but using post-production techniques. This is kind of carrying on from the first movie, the idea of these kind of amorphous tongues, or these kind of flowing objects that kind of travel like a flesh-eating Steadicam was the character in the first movie, and here it returns to be used to take our heroes away. Always through Choi, you get this kind of influence of popular American cinema and movies like the spaghetti westerns, but filtered by his experience as a Chinese person. So you never get like a direct lift. It's always something that's kind of like filtered through his unique worldview. Somebody born in Vietnam, raised in Hong Kong, educated in the University of Texas, somebody who lived and studied in New York, then came back to Hong Kong and worked his way up through the ranks as a Hong Kong movie director. Having had that fascinating journey. And then when he makes a movie, he's influenced by whatever films are being made at that time. And so you get this fascinating kind of combination of East and West and old and new elements. Fascinating lighting in the background. This is something that, again, Arthur Wong probably has shot more movies in the wilds of the New Territories, more of these kind of films than anybody else. So he kind of knows how to shoot every foot of the woods. And this is not actually a studio shot. This actually was a real waterfall based in the New Territories in Hong Kong. And this is actually all out on location for this kind of romantic interlude between these two characters. And by the way, while we're talking about romantic interludes, I just want to do, I don't seldom do this on commentaries, but I want to do a quick shout out to one of my biggest fans, who's actually the wife of one of my fellow commentarians, occasional commentarians, Jude Poyer, Jude's wife, Yanis Poyer. Apparently is a big fan of my commentaries and passed on a message through the grapevine to say she thought I was the bomb in terms of commentaries and doing these on cameras. And I think it's really sweet, I mean, particularly as her husband does similar kind of things. So thanks to Yanis, and I will endeavour to continue to keep up for whatever high standards she's accusing me of being. But anyway, just drop that in. That's the first and only shout out on this particular DVD. This is another key scene that you see repeated again and again in the old Shaw Brothers swordplay films to now, which is the two people caught in a rainstorm, and afterwards they undress and they're kind of keeping each other warm. So it's a kind of enforced intimacy. And here's this these beautiful images from the first film set to this gorgeous song by Sally Yip Seaman, who also worked in films, was actually meant to be in Swordsman, but she was replaced, and they reshot all her scenes for the first Swordsman film. But she's worked with Choi several times, most memorably in Peking Opera Blues. She worked with John Woo on The Killer. She's a wonderful singer, never really has showed great range as an actress, but she's a great singer, and won, as I mentioned earlier, the same song that we're hearing now, won Best Song at the Hong Kong Film Awards when it was performed in the first Chinese Ghost Story. So it's kind of reprising here with these images from the original picture. And audiences in Hong Kong are very familiar with all of the conventions of swordplay, and so you kind of have to find new ways to kind of defy their expectation. Here we are back in the Spaghetti Western Street, and that really is the tumbleweed rolling down there. This is kind of like Spaghetti Westernville. This is like this would have been used, this set used by many period movies and television series being shot at this time is constructed out in the New Territories. This is another carryover from the last movie, that the idea of this scroll, this is initially in the first Chinese Ghost Story, Leslie Jones' character falls in love with the woman depicted on the scroll, and then realizes that the scroll is of somebody who's died many years earlier, so realizes she's a ghost. So here we have this kind of reference to the first movie. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it's very unusual in Hong Kong to have a sequel that's really so literal in absolutely beat for beat, following on and continuing the different strands established from the first movie. Normally, when they do a sequel, they discard every element from the first picture. And I think if you look at something like Saviour of the Soul, there's almost nothing in common between Saviour of the Soul and its sequel, Saviour of the Soul 2, apart from the fact that both films star Andy Lau. There's no real connection between the two. And that's actually something you see, it's endemic in Hong Kong cinema. No one really thinks that the audience is paying that much detail. Here's a reference to the fact that in the Chinese supernatural world, ghosts cannot walk by day, so they're kind of like vampires in that way, and they will actually be destroyed and unable to reincarnate if they are actually touched by sunlight. So you get this kind of reference to that particular aspect. There's a whole series of rules to Chinese supernatural that are totally, unique to Chinese culture and different to the rules that we have in the West. And the vampires are different, the zombies are different. So they're kind of the same names, the ghosts and everything, they're called the same things, but the rules which they must survive by are quite different. And of course, if you've grown up in Chinese culture, you'll have kind of heard these stories at your grandfather's knee. And if not, you come to them fresh as an international audience watching these films. So these movies are really kind of like the folk stories of our generation. And Leslie, really wonderful in close-up, and an actor who really has an effortless quality. In his singing also, he like an effortless quality. And it really is at odds with the fact that I think internally he's somebody who, by the nature of his life and death, we know was quite tortured, and somebody who thought a lot about his image and his career and what he was doing. He never made the transition into making international pictures, though he was heavily in contention for the lead role in the film of the stage play M. Butterfly. And The 11th Hour, he was overlooked in favour of John Lone. And I honestly think that Leslie Cheung would have been a better choice for the role if you just look at Farewell My Concubine, in which he plays an opera player who's like a female impersonator. He's so good in that movie. You think he would have made a more convincing M. Butterfly than John Lone. M. Butterfly really is about an opera performer who manages to convince a Western man, played in that movie by Jeremy Irons, that he's actually a woman. And I think Leslie would have been far better cast. Here again, we're back in Dragon Gate Inn territory, that they're trying to kill anybody staying at the inn is going to get killed and chopped up and served as dinner. So it's really the humans in this movie are even more wicked, if possible, than the ghosts. And I think this is a comment that Choi is making. It's like, really, we shouldn't fear the demons in the woods, but like the demons in ourselves. And so there's like these different ideas being expressed throughout the film. And they always have great types in these films. I mean, like these supporting players. I mean, they've got these great bad guy types. And given the fact that Hong Kong doesn't have a vast population of actors, it's extraordinary the depth and range. This is a rather abrupt transition from what was obviously daylight in the town to these guys running through the woods. So the woods do seem wonderfully atmospheric. And you notice when they actually get the tight shots on the wolves, I was talking to Arthur Wong about this, what they had is reflectors they would hold up just in front of the wolves. Supposedly wolves these are trained dogs, so they'd actually get that kind of glowing effect from the eyes. And some of it is like reflectors, and some of it is, this is a reflector, and sometimes when they were moving, it was actually added on later as a CGI, so it's two different techniques being used to give these wolves this glowing look. And there's like one of my favourite lines, I mean, it's kind of a perversely romantic line, is Leslie Cheung says, "Let me be on the outside so the wolves will eat me first." And I think this is like, a true show of love when a guy says, "We're about to get eaten by wolves, let me get the other side because then they'll bite me first, so I'll be the first to suffer." And so it's like a real testament to love. So there's kind of always throughout these films, they really are about the endurance of love in these most extraordinary circumstances. In the first film, the circumstance with a man being in love with a ghost. Here, both of the protagonists are human, but all the characters and all the elements around them are supernatural and kind of conspire to keep them apart or put them in danger. So here we have yet another song on the soundtrack composed by James Wong and Romeo Diaz, and constant use of music to enhance the mood. What I like about it is the fact that with these films, there's never a sense that they've stuck a Cantonese pop song on the soundtrack to advertise the movie or to kind of attract the fans of a particular artist. That the songs and the music are used really as another character to enhance the plot. And here's like a reference also to the first movie, as we see we're back at this temple, at this ghost-haunted temple that we saw from the first film. And this is obviously such a place of evil that it terrifies even the dogs, or even the wolves, so they run away from this location. And it's kind of like again a bit of a leap of faith that they're running like wildly through the woods, and they happen to come to the one place where they'll be safe. An actual moon shot this is an effect shot, the exterior of the temple, an effect shot, and kind of a Tibetan look to the geography of the outside of the temple. And this is Li Fei in a quick run-on with a one line. She's also, as I mentioned earlier, the stunt woman, the witchy woman from Iron Monkey. And this is getting into the world of weirdness when we get inside this particular temple. This exterior was constructed outdoors, so you get the main gate and this kind of very Beijing-style writing here. And then these stupas here, which are going off into the distance. This is actually an interior set, which was constructed up at the Coke factory. And here's the first transition of the Buddhist master to become a human centipede. This kind of continuing another idea. If you look at other movies, there's always been this kind of transmutation of human into animals, and it's something that you see in Green Snake with the two snake women. But unfortunately, even though Tsui Hark has this imagination to imagine something like this, we did not then have the kind of animatronics or CG to kind of realize it in a realistic manner. This is genuinely disturbing, I think, having this kind of vast hall of these, shell people. They've actually been kind of, as you've seen, they've been scooped out. It's a trick shot there. The bottom part of the frame is actually all real people, or real people and dummies, and the top half of the frame, it's repeating it again using special effects. And this is, again, Tsui trying to kind of expand the tapestry of Hong Kong fantasy cinema. I found this, even though the visual effect, the physical effect is not kind of that well executed, it's kind of a fascinating concept that somebody's come in and kind of like scooped out the insides of all these politicians. And again, I think it's one of Choi's comments that politicians basically are hollow. So he's kind of like physically having them being hollow. Here we are, this very much an Aliens-inspired sequence as he goes out among all these kind of, where these people are being kept as pod people who are going to be fed to the giant centipede. And it's really about, like, monsters have come out into the world and are ruling the affairs of men. So we started off in a kind of a semi-real environment with ghosts, and now we're really going into this kind of other world where there's this kind of like disgusting creatures have risen from the depths and are going to kind of challenge our heroes. And this is really Dante's Inferno, as he's here in this kind of massive bodies. And here's the aliens moment, as we have these guys bundled up like Easter eggs and ready to be consumed by the centipede when he kind of is reborn at this in the time of the eclipse. I really also see some kind of shadows here of Zoo Warriors, because Zoo Warriors kind of was this great environment. Here are the kind of the creatures feasting on the humans, really getting into kind of this Grand Guignol horror here. And but in Zoo Warriors, the whole of the film takes place in this kind of nether realm, which is inhabited by demigods and weird creatures. And though Chinese Ghost Story has a different feel to it overall, this sequence is very much in a par with the Suksan, the Chinese Ghost Story feel. And the second Suksan, the second second of the Zoo Warriors and the Magic Mountain, was really a special effects fantasy that kind of utterly took us out of reality and into this strange CGI created world. And in that sense, perhaps was not as effective as the earlier films were, because even though the movies here, this movie has some very hokey physical effects, one thing about it is it never loses track of its humanity, that you have these very human figures at the center of the action. So it means, even though the effects might not work, because the audience care, they kind of go along for the ride. And I think this is a very important attribute of Tsui Hark as a fantasy film producer and working here with Ching Siu-tung. And here we have this kind of real horror sequence here. And there's one particular gag which I've never seen used in another film. These invisible assailants are kind of dismembering poor Wisey Lee. And what he does to see them is he actually scoops up the blood and uses it as a kind of ink to show where the people who attack him are placed. And it's such a clever idea. There's another Steadicam shot, and this kind of the oft-mentioned flesh-eating Steadicam. There you see some CGI for the flying blades. Quick reference to the one-armed swordsman, as played by Wong in the heady days of Shaw Brothers, which is kind of an archetypal character that we see in Hong Kong action cinema, the guy with only the one-armed sword bearer. Here the blood coming up, and we get this CG effect as he's kind of painted the invisible attackers, and then, of course, leading up to his eventual sacrifice. But I'd say really impressive work from Wisey Lee here, and he's not somebody known for doing martial arts action in the films, but he really comes across as a very strong swordplay hero. Classical archetype. And this is really Choi's representation of the fact that behind the facade of all the gold and glitz of this Buddhist order is actually corruption, and that it's very easy through religion to lead people down the wrong path using bright lights and charisma. So there's the sacrifice, a kind of a Jedi-style sacrifice of our swordsman hero. And momentarily, we're going to see the return of one of the most beloved characters of Hong Kong action fantasy, who is this character played by Wu Ma, the Taoist master seen in the first film, and he makes a timely return. And interesting to note, there's two things that happen. When they meet, Jacky Cheung tells Wu Ma he's actually from Kunlun Mountain sect of Taoism. And Kunlun Mountain, actually, in the Marvel Comics Iron Fist, that's where Iron Fist, the secret city, the lost city, the kind of the Shangri-La that Iron Fist comes from, is actually located in the Kunlun Mountains. And that was actually the first time I heard that phrase. But the moment between Jacky Cheung and Wu Ma is interesting, because like Wu Ma says, all right, you're from Kunlun Mountain. Now, when we're facing evil, it is not a time to argue among sects. So it's really, again, a statement from Tsui Hark about when you are faced with this kind of challenge, it doesn't matter which branch of which religion you come from. What's important is that the good men join forces to overcome evil, which is indeed what saves the day. But that's a quick name check for Kunlun Mountain. There's the yin-yang symbol, the two fish, which is emblematic of Taoism. This great line coming up with after they face the evil Buddha is the one from Wu Ma when he says, "If you dare impersonate Buddha, what would you not dare to do?" Which I think is a great line. It's kind of like, if you can impersonate this great figure. Interesting to see the relationship between these filmmakers and religion. I mean, there's Choi, who technically is some kind of Buddhist, and he's kind of blowing up the Buddha. And then there's John Woo, who is a Christian, and at the end of The Killer blows up the Virgin Mary. So I would say, not reading too much into the subtext of these films, that, both men do have issues in terms of like organized religion and express them in this very imaginative manner. Here we have our our computer-generated effects team from the West getting to show their stuff with these amazing flying sword techniques, the flying sword technique. And again, this is like a reimagination of stuff that you see in the old films. And there's a quick shot there at the end of a real mandala-style representation of Buddha, which I think is just a representation of the real nature of Buddha as the false one disappears. But if you go back and freeze frame, you actually see an interesting shot just as the golden Buddha is driven away. But all of these things, like the flying swords, were seen in the early black and white fantastique films of Hong Kong, but they were just realized in a very primitive way. And Choi now uses all the money and time that he has at his disposal to come up with this, reworking of it. Giant Centipede that we're about to see actually reminds me very much of the same figure as seen in Last Hero of China, which was a film that Jet Li made playing Wong Fei-hung for Wong Jing. And I think Wong Jing not known for being particularly original as a filmmaker, so he maybe borrowed the centipede, maybe even borrowed the centipede suit from this movie. So the Giant Centipede, who is about to make an appearance, was created using a variety of different methods, and we'll go over them in a moment. This is all location. When we're seeing these kind of effect shots, it's interior at the studio, and then when we're seeing like a broader shot, it's actually location. This is very impressive physical effects. This is all done in the studio with the hydraulics behind pushing up the ground. And again, constantly we come back to this idea that Leslie Cheung, even though he's the main character in the film, normally in a movie, in a Hong Kong action picture, the main character has the most power. The main character in a martial arts fantasy epic is the guy who's the better swordsman, who has the better level of martial arts prowess. In these films, Leslie Cheung's character is the least effective, and that's what makes him, I think, such an appealing star. So the centipede suit actually was powered by hydraulics from a company called Mansman Rexroth. So they actually came up with a working physical hydraulic centipede, which you see for some shots. And they actually imported the kind of the robot centipede from the United States for the finale, but when they actually started using it on the set, they found it was really much too stiff for some of the shots that Tsui Hark and Ching Siu-tung had planned. So what they did for some shots is actually somebody wearing a centipede suit, and they took the actors and replaced them with children wearing the same costumes the actors were wearing, so that you got like a forced perspective, so that even though it was like just a guy in a suit, you actually got a sense that it was a massive centipede. So you had all these different techniques being used to bring the centipede to life. And again, I think probably only in a Tsui Hark movie would you have the villain, the heroes being threatened by the villain in the form of this giant centipede. One thing I do note about it is there is a real sense of motion to the ride on the back of the creature. But as I say before, the combination of effect shots being used to create the illusion of the centipede. And in the Jet Li movie, you get to see that they use bladed weapons to defeat the centipede, just as they do here. So the flying swords coming into their own again and being used as like kind of flying surfboard swords. So I think these films must be huge fun to make, as they are to watch. But Jacky Cheung was saying that these are like just a hoot from start to finish, because the director will come on and say, okay, now you're flying on flying swords, you're surfing on swords. And it's like everybody's childhood dream, at least in Hong Kong, I think, to be a swordplay hero or a swordplay character. So it's like a great achievement to actually get to do them. And the music kind of references the Dao rap that Wu Ma performed in Chinese Ghost Story. And the characters here really, you have a sense that they have to kind of keep raising the odds. So they fought their way through the King Kong style monster, and then you had like the evil Buddha, and finally you have the biggest and scariest creature of them all, which is this centipede. And our version of Obi-Wan Kenobi, which is Wu Ma's Taoist master, using these kind of, and the sound effects are very Ben Burt Star Wars, as he's firing these beams of power from his palms. And again, something that you're not, these kind of things that are so uniquely Hong Kong fantasy, you're just not going to see them in a American-made action picture anytime soon. Also, I think this movie probably has an award for the most kinds of gunk tipped on actors from all directions, from start to finish. Everybody gets coated in blood, gore, guts, or some other kind of ghastly substance. So our full respect to the long-suffering performers for the work they put into the film. A combination of miniatures and, as I mentioned before, the old Hong Kong fallback of the guy in the suit. And here we have one of the several false endings. I mean, anybody who thinks that the real monster has been defeated at this point of the film, obviously has not seen enough action fantasies. Of course, there's going to be like kind of the build-up to the fake ending, and then the fake ending, and then the fake ending. I was mentioning earlier the gunk. I mean, poor old Wu Ma, look at him. There's a guy who's taken a faceful, and it's kind of like the character always played for laughs in these films. And one of the great creations of Hong Kong action cinema, this particular character of this rather testy but very knowledgeable Taoist master who travels in the forests fighting creatures. So then we get the cutaway, and you think, the happy ending, freeze frame. But no, he's grabbed by the creature and dragged. And this leads into the sequence I call the kind of Jonah and the whale, because they're actually getting ingested into the belly of the creature itself, which, of course, is not is actually mocked up at the studio. So they have like the studio interior shot of the inside of the belly, supposedly the belly of the centipede itself. So it's like the Jonah in the belly of the whale. And again, I think the depiction of the interior very reminiscent of Aliens, in terms of the Alien movies had this kind of whole thing of these kind of pod people, and we saw it earlier, and here we see it again, these guys, the idea that they're kind of somehow morphing into the stomach walls of the centipede. So it's like, again, Choi kind of watching films, and I think with him, Choi and also Ching Siu-tung, particularly Choi, watching films, and every time he watches a new film or has a new influence, it kind of just enters the palette of his filmmaking, and so he reinterprets it in a way that suits him. So I never feel with his movies that he kind of slavishly takes images and styles from other filmmakers. He takes ideas, then reinterprets them in a unique manner. Like the kind of the get out of jail quick card here is the idea that they can discorporate and that their spirits will leave their bodies, and then can they bring their spirits back in time? This is another convention of the genre, the idea that your spirit can leave your body for a certain amount of time, and then there's always this kind of ticking clock, as in if you don't come back to your body by a certain point, then your spirit will be destroyed and you will not be able to reincarnate. So there's that constant challenge. Here we have big pyrotechnic shots, these filmed exterior in the new territories, again without permission from the police, so you have to be careful. You do your big bang and then run for it. And this idea that now the spirits have been discorporated and have to get back into the body in time, and if they fail to do so, then that's it, the body will die, and maybe if the spirit is kind of destroyed in the spirit world, then this particular being will not be able to reincarnate. And you can see this in the movie Dead and the Deadly with Sammo Hung. It's actually a plot point in Dead and the Deadly, and quite a lot of other films as well. These are all like elements from Chinese folklore. So we have like the tragic end of the love story, or the kind of the the potentially tragic end of this love story between Lei Gaiyan and Jacky Cheung's character, Cheung Hot Yao, as he's like, drifting away. Great shot there from Arthur, the kind of crane shot looking down on these tiny figures. So again, if you are familiar with Chinese folklore, when you watch these films, by watching these films, you become familiar with it and you understand the conventions of the genre and the rules. And I think sometimes it's difficult with these movies when you actually play them to an audience in the West and say, okay, this is what's going on. Western audiences have been brought up with a whole different set of ideas about the way the supernatural world operates. And so this can be disconcerting. So we have like one of our several endings here, and this very evidently a reference to the first movie and the painting, the girl in the painting. One element that they never really explore here is why Joey Wong's character does look exactly like the ghost from the first film, because it's not her, it's not a reincarnation, because the dates don't work, the years don't work. But I guess it was just trying to find a way to bring her back for a second picture and kind of not do the obvious thing of repeating the first movie again, which a lot of Hong Kong films have done in the past. Sequels kind of, try to copy what's gone before. And the wonderful close-up shot here, the tortured features of Leslie Cheung, one of the better-looking men who's worked in Hong Kong cinema. And here we are back at the Shaw Brothers lot for the big finale, and this golden pig, which is a traditional element of a classic wedding. I love it. If you look at one of the extras is kind of walking along, this shot was used a lot in the marketing for the film because it's such a wonderful look, that design for the wedding gown. But if you look at one of the extras walking along, he's kind of complaining about the heat, and you can see him talking away as they kind of meant to be carrying the palanquin. At this time, we didn't have video assist, so you didn't know if anybody was talking away until you saw it later. But if you look back when they come down here, there's a guy at the front in one of the shots, and he's like going on and on about, how bad. There he is, see, yattering away on the left. How bad to be in this heat, carry the palanquin. You can tell it's the Shaw Brothers backlot because there's a very distinctive archway that they move underneath. And this main street's been used in many, many Shaw Brothers movies. You also can see it in Once Upon a Time in China. And Shaw's, by the time this movie was made, Shaw Brothers themselves were not making movies, but they still had their traditional old Chinese street backlot, and they were just rented out to other filmmakers. So they were shooting TV series there, and they were renting it to other filmmakers. But these shots of Joey were used in the media a lot when they were marketing this movie because they were so different from the look she had in the first film. And also wonderful costume design. I mean, she really looks gorgeous in this particular wedding gown. Red being the lucky colour in Chinese, and white being the colour of death, so that you don't necessarily have Chinese brides wearing white. They're wearing red because red's like a lucky colour. And so this wonderful kind of almost like an ethnic look to her clothing, and the style of the ornamentation is like something from one of the minority tribes of China, rather than the kind of classic look that you're used to from these kind of period movies. So the false endings continue. This looks like the ending shot with the Taoist master and his new protege riding off into the sunset, and you think, okay, this love story is has got an unhappy ending, and then of course we get a further twist. I mean, this effort, I guess, to let the audience leave the theatre satisfied. This is always kind of the primary intention of Hong Kong filmmakers, is basically to give their audience a good time, and that supersedes all other considerations. Yet another song from the soundtrack playing. That, I would think, not the easiest headgear to be horse riding in, because it kind of looks like there was a really funny MTV from Chemical Brothers where they had people fighting wearing like big earphones, and they look not unlike that headgear. All the film this period of Hong Kong, so many movies in the early 90s were martial arts action epics. Everybody was learning horse riding and swordplay skills, so they could learn at least basic stuff they would need to star in swordplay movies. And as we go into the final credits, the gorgeous title track performed by Leslie Cheung, and this specially shot. This isn't from the first movie. This is actually a shot especially for the second film, to give it like a closing moment. It's almost like the ghost from the first film giving her blessing to Leslie's relationship with her lookalike, with her doppelganger in the second Chinese ghost story. So that's the credit for Mansman Rex Roth, who kind of like animated the Centipede. Now, CSL, I mean, they lent phones. Salon I get because they gave the camera equipment. But I don't think... Regal Riverside Hotel, that's where everybody stays when they're shooting in the new territories. And great to see this movie again. It's a fantastic example of a very unique strand of Hong Kong cinema, this romantic, supernatural action epic, and really shows the combination of talents of producer Tsui Hark, director Ching Siu-tung, the late, great Leslie Cheung, and Jacky Cheung, and this wonderful supporting cast, all at the height of their game, and really when Hong Kong cinema was at its best, was at its peak. So it's been my great pleasure to watch it with you, and I guess we'll all be back here for Chinese Ghost Story 3. Credit there for Paul Foneroff, a good friend of mine, working on translation work and other things, fully biliterate and bilingual and biliterate. So Leslie Cheung sings us out, and it's Bey Logan on behalf of Hong Kong Legends. Joy Gin, Jia Jian, sayonara, and goodbye.